Welcome to the explainer. So our source text kicks off with this really powerful idea that surrender is the means to liberation. But hang on, what does that actually mean? Because it's probably not what you're thinking. Let's really dive in and break down what the nature of surrender is all about.
Okay, so let's get right into it with a question I'm pretty sure we've all felt. You know that feeling, right? You've studied for weeks, you've prepped the presentation, you've double-checked every single detail of a project. You have done literally everything in your power, and yet there's that little knot of anxiety, that worry about the result. Why is that? Well, to really get to the bottom of that feeling, we first have to tackle the word surrender itself. For a lot of us, it kind of sounds like defeat or quitting. But the text we're looking at today offers a completely different take. Right away, the source just flips the script on us. Surrender isn't about giving up, it's bhakti, a concept that translates to a complete and unconditional love for God. That's a totally different way of looking at it, isn't it? And this really lays out the difference perfectly. On one hand, you have the physical act, quitting, conceding defeat. But on the other hand, what our source is talking about is a mental attitude. It's all about understanding our own limits and then turning that awareness into this complete love for God. So, okay, how does this new way of thinking about surrender actually help us? Well, it gets at what the source calls this great mismatch in our lives, that gap between all the effort we put in and the results we actually get. Most of us, we're basically raised on this idea that there's a simple formula. You work hard, you persevere, and boom, success. We're taught that if we just push hard enough, we control the outcome and can get whatever we want, whether it's fame, money, you name it. But this text, it just throws a wrench in that whole idea. It says, nope, there's no direct line between our effort and the result. Instead, it points to this other, invisible factor in any success, and that is God's grace. And what's so cool is how the source makes its point. It uses this surprisingly modern example, right? Think about those scientists at a space station watching a shuttle launch. I mean, they've done everything humanly possible, down to the last screw. If their work guaranteed the outcome, they'd be totally relaxed. But that anxiety they feel, the text says that's basically an admission that there's something beyond their control. And the author calls that God's grace. Okay, so what happens if we just ignore this whole mismatch thing? What's the consequence of putting all our faith in our own two hands, only to fail over and over? Well, the source gets pretty specific and, frankly, a little concerning here. To really drive this home, the source zooms in on a particular mindset, and it uses the term atheist in this context to describe people who believe they're the only force shaping their world. The idea here is that they trust only in their own work, without any room for a higher power or grace in their lives. And this is where the text makes its most serious claim. It argues that when this I'm in total control mindset meets repeated failure, that whole worldview can just shatter. With nothing else to fall back on, the source suggests this can lead to some really destructive behavior, things like substance abuse or even, in the most tragic cases, suicide. Now, it's really important to see that the text presents this specifically as a result of not having that trust in God as a safety net. So all of this, effort, grace, this new idea of surrender, it all leads us to one final, really crucial point. And it's not another answer, it's a question for us to think about. And here it is. After everything we've talked about, this is really what we're left with. We've redefined surrender as love, we've talked about that gap between what we do and what happens, and we've seen what the source thinks can happen if we ignore that gap. So the big question for you is this. In your own life, how do you navigate that space? Where does your absolute best effort end, and where does that trust begin?